I'd like to introduce you to our panel today. We do have, for the superintendent from Sandoval is here, Dr. Jennifer Garrison. If you would like to acknowledge her. And our next two people on our panel are from an organization that is in between organizations. We understand that they are both transitioning to the Illinois MTSS network. But first we have Katie Pohlman, who is right now the regional supervisor for ISTAC at the end. And in the middle we have Melissa Hannasch, who is the evaluation coordinator for the network, for Illinois MTSS network. So I thought before we got into the questions, we just have maybe about 3 questions for each of you, and they've already had discussions about who's answering which part. We'd like Dr. Garrison to give us a little background on Sandoval. We know it's down in the bottom part of the state, but anything you can tell us about Sandoval?
Sure. We are a priority district. I started in Sandoval 7 years ago, so we've been on a continuous improvement process since then. Talking about how long we've been working together, we've been on this journey together since the fall of 2012. So our journey began with an IRTI grant focused on the elementary specifically, and then we decided we needed to focus on a district level. We're small, we're rural, but when we talk to others, we want you to think about your size and your capacity and how what we've learned and experienced can relate to your demographics, whether you're urban or rural. I don't know how many suburban districts we have in the room with the focus of today being with Illinois Center for School Improvement. So when we started, the district office consists of me. I am the superintendent, the curriculum instruction director, the business manager, transportation, building and grounds, grants, everything besides I have an administrative assistant full-time. So when we were looking at how we do continuous improvement from a district level, we decided we still need a district leadership team. And that's really where we began thinking is what systems are in place to support continuous improvement. I will tell you that it took us a whole semester of framing our system. I know this morning somebody was talking about human capacity and limited capacity. That was a lot of our focus on how do we do all of that's required with the people we have, especially when we are cutting over in the past 7 years. I have cut 20% of my teaching staff, 20% of my support staff, and 50% of administrative staff. Now you have to remember, in a small district, there's the superintendent and 2 principals, so when I cut 1 of 2 principals, that equals 50%. But since then, we've been able to bring back and really look at our structure and shift some things around. So that's really the historical perspective. And I want you to know, fall of 2012 is when we started talking about the systems approach. We also had a school improvement grant at that time focused on transforming our high school from the bottom 5%, hopefully to the state average, and our ultimate goal is to be high performing overall. So we started with talking about a vision aligned with a mission statement. So what is our vision? We wanted our MTSS system to integrate with that. We had academic teams and we had behavior teams. So we talked about kids in an academic team, and then we talked about the same child in a behavior team. So we decided we needed to blend or braid our MTSS model, and that's really where we've been on this journey, is how do we talk about the whole child? The whole child approach is really what we're about. There's a lot of theory around that, and we're trying to follow the research, the best practice, the theory, and put that into practice based on our demographics. So along with having that vision, we've learned we had to be flexible too along the way. So keeping the path as a superintendent, but still being flexible is really what we're about. And I think I'm kind of going into question 1, but if you want to go ahead and.
Right. Is there anything else you want to add for question 1 in terms of what other systems you had to have in place?
Yes. Most of we have a lot for question 1, if that's okay.
Keep going.
Systems is, that's what we love. That's what we love. That's what we talk about. So I'm going to hand it to Melissa. She's really been focusing on the evaluation side, how we gather the data from a systems perspective, district and building level.
Thank you. So when we first started, the very first thing that we did together was actually a self-assessment. And that self-assessment is called the Self-Assessment Problem-Solving Implementation, and it's through the IRTI network. But is a tool that identified critical features for implementing MTSS. And by doing so, we really started with the end in mind. So by looking at all of those items, we knew ultimately where we wanted to go. And it's exciting because at this point, we've mastered all those items on that tool after 3 years. We know change takes some time. But because we had a tool like that, we were able to identify where we were right now with implementation of those critical features of MTSS, and then identify what our next steps should be. So by doing that, one thing that we did really intentionally, and I think is probably, I would bet one of the most important things that we did is we created a very specific action plan aligned with that assessment. So we very clearly identified these were the tasks that we needed to accomplish. This was who was going to do it, when they were going to do it by, this is what the outcome was going to look like, and this is how we're going to follow up. And that drove a lot of our work at the district level, is continually going back to that action plan. And that defined our agenda items. It defined what next steps we were going to be taking, helped us understand where we needed to go. And so that evaluation piece was really, really helpful, as well as identifying those action steps. And we did meet monthly as a district leadership team and utilized that action plan throughout our meetings over the last 3 years. And then Katie's going to share how we came to putting together the teaming structure, which is another really important critical element of MTSS.
So and Melissa was just talking about that action plan, and the district leadership team, or that district level team, was very important in being able to coordinate and have those functions for assessing that implementation. So both coordinating and assessing that implementation and putting those action plans into place. So while always keeping in mind that capacity building for sustainability. So as Dr. Garrison mentioned, very limited resources. They've had a lot of support from statewide initiatives, but at the same time having to focus on what are they going to put in place that's going to be able to sustain. Or Dr. Garrison also mentioned they've had several grants. So how do they utilize those resources but allow for sustainability after those resources are gone? So really always keeping that capacity building and sustainability at the forefront. The other piece with their teaming structure is really identifying what worked in their district. So their structure may or may not work in another district, but they had to really look at what are the roles, the functions, the things that we need in our own district, and how can we be flexible and build a structure that's going to allow for that communication to flow both from the practice level up to that district level. So they function with that district leadership team coordinating and assessing that implementation, and then building leadership teams that are made up of key players that include a chair member from each of their building teams that meets also on a monthly basis. So that building leadership team, including those chairs and administrators and some other key players from their building. All staff then are members of some team within their buildings. The 3 teams that work for Sandoval are having a communication and acknowledgement team, a data team, and a tier 2-3 team. Again, focusing on whole child and not separating academic or other behavioral supports as well. Then in each building, they also have that individual intervention support team that it's there for problem solving around individual students. Those teams, I know that we were just ending the morning session around talking about having some effective practices to make those teaming structures work. So having very clear purpose and role with those teams, and what is each team there to accomplish, and how will they meet during that time. So using agendas and meetings. As I said, the structure that Sandoval was able to set up has really allowed for policy to both enable the practice at the practice level and for practice to help inform policy. So while for example, the barriers from implementing at that practice level or classroom building level, those building chairs are able to bring those barriers to that district leadership team on a monthly basis and say, this is where we're struggling, and the district team can have some discussion around that, help assess, and help make changes that might support for practice to be implemented. And just the same, having those building leadership representatives on the DLT or the district team allows them to be able to take decisions around policy back to their building teams. And usually it's not just, that they're there to have that discussion at the district team. Usually there's time for, this is what we need to take back to those building teams and have some discussion around, or, maybe it needs to go lower than that as well into some of those other committees. And I think I go on to the next one as well, right? So kind of continuing with leadership and thinking about those processes for supporting policy and practice. One of the big pieces that really has supported Sandoval was developing an MTSS guidebook, which through the IRTI grant that they were involved in, that was was a requirement. Can I say requirement? Okay, it was a requirement. So part of what they wanted to title theirs an MTSS guidebook and really focus on their mission of that whole child approach. So the DLT was able to write policies and procedures that were consistent for the district throughout their buildings. That was able to support utilizing that MTSS framework for an implementation of, and the implementation of their interventions within their continuum of supports. The most important piece, though, is that that's been a living document. So it's been revised and edited and continuing to be revised on an ongoing basis. So really having those, I would say, more procedures and things written down, but not official policy, has really allowed for that consistency within in their approach. And I think now I'll pass it over to Melissa.
Thank you. And one thing that was nice, I'll just add on with having that MTSS guidebook, was that it provided an opportunity as a DLT for us to have conversations about all the important elements that go into implementing MTSS. And so ultimately we had a product, and that product helps with sustainability, so other people understand those conversations that we had. But it was really important for us to have these discussions about how we're going to use data and how we're going to set up our tiers and all of those pieces. And so that guidebook just provided a nice structure for those conversations. And another important part is identifying partnerships and communication. And so a part of what you want to look at is, who are your stakeholders? Of course, our really important stakeholders include our students. And so there's a formation of a student advisory group and student feedback and information from students coming through the system on what is being put into place as well. Parents are a very important group that we want to have two-way communication with. What we did at Sandoval is we identified a parent community liaison, and she was provided with some training on Parent Leadership 101, and her role really was to be kind of a peer-to-peer trainer or peer-to-peer individual for sharing information on MTSS. So she participated in training on what MTS looks like that was designed for parents, and then her role was to go back and share that with other parents. Also sitting on committees with community members and sharing information and getting feedback through that mechanism. We also, through the website, had opportunities for two-way communication information coming from parents. I did surveys, created a parent brochure, parent-friendly language that shares what this looks like so that all parents have a basic understanding of what MTSS is all about. And then also, there are a lot of partners that participate on the Sandoval District Leadership Team. External partners, individuals like Katie and I, who aren't living and breathing all the activities within Sandoval, but are providing support. It was really important for all of us that are supporting Sandoval to come together and have special conversations about how do we have common language, common understanding for sharing information with the district. That was extremely important to us, that communication be consistent consistent and that we're all on the same page as we're moving forward. And then also Dr. Garrison, I'll hand it to her because she has a little special insight on like just another important stakeholder is our school boards and those kinds of messages. And so I'll let you share your thoughts on that.
Sure. When we have the policy conversation at our district leadership team, my board is made up of a board who likes information in 5 or 10 minutes. So that's the makeup of my board. You might have different school boards who want to be more involved. But through the Illinois Association of School Boards, we always talk about the balcony perspective. So just like PARA, the Performance Evaluation Reform Act, with our MTSS guidebook, it was the same way. Just informing them of the MTSS guidebook, which we refer to as administrative procedures. So defining policy versus procedures was very important in our conversation with the school board. Really, that's the curriculum instruction in our systems piece. The school board has a responsibility to monitor the data and our return on investment, but actually getting into what we call the weeds, we really try to honor that balcony perspective with our school board. So 5-10 minutes updates at a board meeting, that's how I communicate with my school board, how we're moving forward with curriculum instruction, then bringing that data in quarterly to review the data, both the lagging and the leading indicators. So they are making data-informed decision-making, but also listening to the advice of their administrative team and the teacher voices there as well. With the systems conversation, we also need to talk about the tiered curriculum, instruction, assessment, learning supports. And really, we could talk all day about that. But through all of the education reform that we've embarked upon in Illinois, we chose the Danielson model really as our framework for teaching and learning. And when you look in the Danielson framework, you can connect everything we're doing to a component. So now it's becoming real for our teachers because they have stakes in it. That's their evaluation. But it's also not something that's separate and impacting our student learning. So the Danielson framework is really how again, that's our anchor for everything that we're doing when we talk about teaching and learning. And we'll talk more about the external partners when we get to question 2, but
I thought we were on question 2.
No, we're still on question 1, I'm sorry. Question 1 is big and 2 and the rest of them are shorter, so we're good. As Illinois CSI came into the district, we started talking about our goals and our worthy target. So the past 2 years, we've been focusing on vertical alignment of our math. So I'm just going to give you an example so you can understand how it's working in practice. So when we look at what we knew as ISAT and PSAE scores, it was very clear that math was an area that Sandoval as a district needed to focus on. So we wrote our worthy target and our SMART goal around math district-wide. We also then have looked at our Common Core standards, or the new Illinois Learning Standards, to be correct in my vocabulary. It was across all teachers. It's more complicated at the high school to integrate math into all content areas, but we did that with ELA. So this year, math is still our focus because we haven't seen the data go where we want it to, and monitoring those adult practices is really where we're at with the fidelity of implementation. And our awesome team, who I might as well acknowledge right now because the time is right, our Area 5 CSI team with Carrie Garrett as our leader. We have Linda Brissenden as our DL, and we have Tom Hawkins as our amazing coach. And I also have Stephanie Thomas here, who has worked with several grants with Sandoval. So they are the ones who monitor and help with the fidelity of instruction because of our capacity piece, and that is so important. Without them, that would go on the shoulders of either teacher leaders or principals, but bringing that data back to the table. And just a celebration piece, as the grade school has really embraced this, and I think it was making connections, real world connections, our data has skyrocketed in seeing those adult practices just this past year because teachers are having intentional conversations around it. But yet, we can still connect that back to the Danielson framework, so they're building evidence in their portfolio to provide to their evaluators, so that continues the conversations from the systems perspective, which of course, in the end, we're improving student outcomes. Determining universal screener has been another journey as a unit district. We would like to find that one universal screener that works for all grades. We're not quite there yet. We use AimsWeb at the primary grade levels, and now we're with STAR, reading and math, but that's an ongoing conversation with other districts to find that universal screener that works for a pre-K through 12 district and all of our other subgroups as well. Data-informed decision-making is where we're at now and using our data.
You may have remembered this morning there was a comment made about the early warning system, and that was one of the places that we did start. The early warning system is part of AIR, comes from the National High School Center, and through that system it has indicators for preventing dropout. What are those research-based indicators that we should be taking into account to prevent dropout for our middle school and high school? So we looked at those and identified what made sense for the tiers within Sandoval for database decision making at the middle school, high school. Also looked at AimsWeb and our other data sources at the elementary for making decisions. So we had to be sure that we knew what decision rules were that we had for each of the tiers and being very explicit. We believed in pulling together multiple sources of data, identifying what those data sources were, and how did we identify whether the issue was significant enough to warrant tier 2 or tier 3. So then with that comes the creation of like an Excel document that lays out all of those data sources so we can clearly see color coordinated, which is green, which is yellow, which is red, and that helps to make those decisions. And so those conversations are certainly very important in identifying your decision rules and having some flexibility within those decision rules. And we heard a bit about that this morning as well. Certainly important to have visual displays of the data, making it more easy for interpretation purposes. And one thing that we came together as external partners working with Sandoval was creating a protocol for database decision making that is still in process. But part of what we wanted to do is we're working with the whole child, the whole system, and we're not wanting to just focus on academic or just focus on behavior or doing them in isolation. Sandoval's really good at looking at their behavior data and making decisions based on behavior data, but maybe not as well with academics. And so we created a protocol that was designed that could support any kind of database decision that we're working on, whether it be at the district level, the school level, the instructional team level, to support a process of actually using the data and not just having all this data, but in actually how do we use it and help us go forward with making decisions. So that is something that is in process right now. Fidelity has been a big part of what we've done over the last year and will continue to be a big part of this year, monitoring fidelity of implementation. The IRTA network has a number of tools for doing that. CSI has been very helpful with the adult practices and identifying that piece with fidelity, and that's been really helpful conversations for us at the DLT level as well. And the next big component is professional learning, and Dr. Garrison will share a little on that.
So as we've evolved, I'm sure you know in every building you probably have different strengths and weaknesses. It's the same in a small district. We have grade levels that really grasp something and then others that struggle more so. So an exciting thing that I've seen through this is teachers wanting to embrace their own professional learning. So we talk a lot about differentiating for student instruction, and as we started, really this came about with PARA, the Performance Evaluation Reform Act. Why, Superintendent, are we as teachers required to sit through the same PD when I'm an exemplar in this and I have demonstrated evidence where really you're teaching either to the middle or to those of us who haven't grasped the concept yet. So our teachers have actually requested differentiated professional learning and that it be job embedded. To me, that is a huge celebration and a huge win for us, and it excites me that some of us, not all of us, are there in our thinking in our district, but that's very important that it's real and that it's taking them as a professional to that next level. One way that we've done that is, again, connecting back to math as our worthy target, is looked at a book study which talked about, I can't think of the book off the top of my head, but it was implementing the Common Core in a PLC environment, focused on math. So our building leadership teams, both teams actually looked at the books, and then their job was to teach teachers, not to read the chapter, but take it to that next level of applying the information with what we're already doing, aligned to our school improvement and our district improvement plans. So to see that actually happen, the elementary is on their second book. And again, leading the way with teachers teaching teachers, which in turn builds capacity. So if the superintendent leaves, the principal leaves, we have turnover, that capacity of that teacher leader is embedded, and that's really where we're trying to get, is that capacity down to the teacher level. Now we're ready for question 2.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left.
That's okay.
No, but actually, we're going to borrow about 5 minutes from our break time since we were kind of late coming in, so Dan, kind of keep me posted. We're going to go to 1:05. And so with the was there anything else you wanted to add from question 2 in terms of your partners?
Yes. We'll let Katie start with the historical perspective of our partners because it's very complicated.
And I'll try to make it brief. So Sandoval has been along for a journey with many transitions at a state level with supports that have been offered. So I became involved with Sandoval as part of ISTAC when we were not integrated projects. And so when they were implementing with PBIS and supporting through that implementation, but became more heavily involved in the district whenever they did create their district leadership team after becoming an IRTI partner district. And so then that's when we were really able to work with that district level team and help with coordinating that district-wide implementation of their framework and interventions. Then Sandoval, there was an integration of our siloed ISTAC projects. There were 5 former projects, and we were able to integrate. Well, Sandoval had written and received a school climate transformation grant and wanted to continue on their journey of working towards a more holistic MTSS approach. And so ISTAC was able to continue to be at that table and support with that role coming from that climate and culture side of that MTSS framework. And now following along with Sandoval's direction of that whole child approach, the state is continuing to integrate. So as you noticed when Melissa and I were introduced, that we are being introduced as one network. And so at the state level, the ISTAC climate and culture side, integrating with that academic IRTI side for that MTSS, to create a new Illinois MTSS network. So transitioning once again in that support to align with more of that integrated whole child approach and giving more streamline to the supports to districts. So as we continue in our merger, the supports for districts are evolutionary and might not necessarily look quite the same as how it's happened in Sandoval, but we know that our support as the Illinois MTSS network will be continuing to support districts for building that capacity for infrastructures to help them sustain and implement a continuum of evidence-based practices utilizing that MTSS framework. So while supports might look different, that is the goal, and truly looks at the practice level what Sandoval is trying to do, and states now following similar path along with that.
And as far as collaborating with external partners, just to give you an idea, Sandoval's a small rural district. Our district leadership team consists of myself, the 2 building principals. We have teachers, our co-chairs from each building. We also have Illinois MTSS Network, or IRTI, ISTAC. Through our school climate transformation grant, we have Midwest PBIS, which is a required TA. We have the U.S. Department of Ed informally sitting at our table because they're monitoring that grant. And we have the Illinois Center for School Improvement. Our district leadership team meetings fill our entire conference room, and then we walk away and the principals and I look at each other and it's like, wow, we have all these awesome supports. But one of the things that I encourage all of you as external partners in the room is if a district is already moving, it's important for those external partners to collaborate. And I think we have one of the best examples, I might even say, in the state. And my conversations with our leadership at the state board, and I want to publicly acknowledge Amy Jo Clemens for the one plan approach is what I've been advocating for our district, and it's happened. And that is another huge celebration that it's happened. Our one plan approach, now it's quite a lengthy plan, but that it has our SMART goals, which can be looked at every year, 2 years, all the way down to our action plan, which takes us to those things we're doing at a semester. Through, again, the collaboration and ISBE breaking down the silos, now that one plan I could submit to right now. We'll see how this evolves, but right now it's working. And again, I just think that's an important message for the external partners in the room, is everybody comes with their own ideas and their own framework. Illinois CSI, ISTAC, IRTI, Midwest PBIS, the Department of Ed, ISBE. We would be going 10 million directions without those collaborative conversations. So that's a very important part of this entire system, is to get going in the same direction.
Okay.
Thank you. Somebody else agrees with that.
In these last 5 minutes, can you talk a little bit about, we've heard about some of your successes, so we've covered that, and maybe even other challenges in terms of your resources. Can you just talk generally about your next steps?
Sure. Next steps really are fidelity of implementation. We still are not where we need to be. There are a lot of hard conversations that need to occur. So while we have moved our systems approach along, now it's the practice piece. How do we get the adults doing what we expect the adults to do? How do we monitor that fidelity using data-based decision-making? And really, so fidelity of instruction is the next step, and then creating that culture of candor is really, and I think I just took that word from CSI, but we talk about hard conversations. Hard conversations, the vocabulary I use, I think culture of candor is a nicer way to say it. But we call it crickets. So when it comes time for hard conversations, one of our teams, we would just look at each other and be the crickets, and not being willing to openly say, yeah, we have a problem, how are we going to solve it? To get the adults into the problem-solving mindset themselves. We have an all-day training tomorrow with our Tier 2, 3 team at the junior, senior high to model the problem-solving on the adult practice side. So that fidelity of implementation, along with the culture of candor, to have those hard conversations at the district leadership team, the building leadership team, down to those instructional teams.
Okay. If people wanted a copy of your guidebook, is that available to be shared nationwide yet?
Stephanie, are we good for that? Yes.
You are? Okay, so how would they access that? On your website or contact you?
We do not have it public source, so you would need to contact me.
Okay, okay. And so we'll get that information, or someone, if you're interested, get that information from Dr. Garrison. I don't know if we have time for 2 questions from the audience. Let's just try real quickly. Are there any people who have questions for Sandoval? You guys were good. You're very thorough. They didn't have any.
Or they're asleep.
Okay. Was there anything you want to say in closing then? It's on you. Any of you? Anything you'd like to say in closing?
Maybe I'll just say that I think a big part of why Sandoval's gone forward so much is because of leadership of Dr. Garrison, and that she has been phenomenal in pulling together all these external partners and having a vision and really making sure that we move forward. And so I just want to acknowledge her.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't like public acknowledgement, but thank you.
Again, and we thank each of you for agreeing to be in our panel, bringing us information from Southern Illinois. You could actually say south of 80. We could call that Southern Illinois. Okay.
Call it Central Southern.
Central Southern, I like that.